Welcome to the Chi podcast, Anna from Burnout Broccoli. Thank you for coming on. It's been a little while that we've been trying to do this, so I'm grateful to have you here.
That's great to be here. Actually, yeah, it's been a while, so I'm glad we're finally talking about this because I think this is going to be a good one where we can kind of bounce back and forth between sort of our understanding of burnout and talk about a lot of things.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so we actually connected through Instagram because we were both it was actually quite at the early stage of both mine and your kind of foray into the content marketing side of things. So it's been cool to see you grow in yourself, the consistency, and yeah, your offers coming along. So just wanted to acknowledge you there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a process, right? As entrepreneurs, we have to kind of learn a lot, grow our capacity in a major way. So yeah, it's always, awesome to have another entrepreneur acknowledge the wins.
Absolutely. And you used to be involved in research, correct?
Yeah, back in the day, I was in research and innovation in the tech space, and that's how I actually got into biohacking and all these things. At one point, I was working for a company that was developing meditation solutions
Mm.
using brain-computer interfaces, so brain sensing devices and things like that. So I had to do research with people who were into biohacking. And at the time, I thought, what a bizarre crowd. They're tracking their biomarkers. They have these spreadsheets for how they're doing, and they're trying all this stuff, and they're really getting into it. And yeah, but I saw that it's kind of a new trend for people who are taking ownership of their health and wellness. And when I went through burnout, it actually helped me recover because I found that professionals I was working with couldn't provide me with a full roadmap for what's happening, where I should be going, how long it's going to take. They didn't have a lot of the answers. So I had to kind of take matters into my own hands and become a biohacker myself. And I don't know. I love it. It's fun. It's awesome. Definitely don't have the prejudice I used to have anymore about tracking your wellness.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, it would have been interesting. So at that point, you hadn't previously had any experience with, say, like meditation or um, things orientated towards health when you're in the research space until intersecting with those people?
You know, it's interesting actually. I did used to meditate, and one of the things that drew me towards wellness space, I guess, was the fact that I've been practicing Falun Gong for a number of years. And Falun Gong is a Qigong practice,
Mm.
that cultivates your energy. But it's different from other practices in the sense that you also have the principles that you follow: truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. So I was used to kind of doing the inner work to cultivate my character, to become a better person, and doing those exercises. So when I started learning about meditation in general from a more scientific perspective, I found it interesting to find validation coming from academia for some of the stuff I already felt was working, but we didn't necessarily have a scientific explanation for. So more and more studies are coming out explaining how mindfulness works, how it affects your vitals, how it's changing your mind, helping your brain change, all that good stuff. It was really cool to learn about that because back then, I think there was still quite a bit of prejudice against mindfulness practices and meditation. And I know at the time when I was talking to people about doing research in the meditation space, some of my tech friends were straight up kind of laughing. Meditation, ha ha ha, sort of, that's, weird and nerdy.
Mm.
Well, lo and behold, we've been through a tough number of years. Things have really changed in the last while. And a lot of the same people that were laughing are now trying meditation themselves, right? So has that been your
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah. So I started meditating through probably more of spiritual practice, and I it took a while because I was doing it because, you know, I felt like it was the spiritual way, and, you know, guided meditations, and it would usually give me like a deep sense of relaxation. But it really wasn't until I went through The Power of Now with Eckhart Tolle, and, you know, deeply, probably because I was suffering from a lot of egoic structures dominating the mind, and my mind being so highly active, taking up a lot of energy. And then when I started meditating properly and finding inner stillness, that I was like, like I really felt like I found meditation, and that deep inner peace and tranquility when you can access your inner being. And I could kind of feel that difference of the awareness moving from the outer of my being into the inner, and how much of a sense of stillness and peace that brought to my life. And also how I could start to detect the difference between the awareness being on the outside and when you're more in your mind and reactive and operating from, say, sympathetic nervous system, and you're being more stressed, versus when I would meditate and go within, more parasympathetic, and that would be connected to my more true self, and I could actually have that deep state of being that would allow me to act how I wanted to in the moment, rather than the conditioned patterns that can happen when you operate from the mind. And so once I had that real contrast, I was like, okay, now I really can like embrace this. So in the beginning, I was probably just doing it because I was thinking I was meant to on the spiritual path, but later really saw the benefit. So in terms of how I was seeing different people react to meditation, I guess for the last 8 years being on that spiritual path, I've seen people meditating to different degrees, but I can definitely see, like you said, from the last few years, the progressions in scientific discoveries, that meditation is being more highly valued, and especially, like, you know, for a mindfulness thing, although I feel like that doesn't quite cover the depth that meditation can offer, but it's definitely a good start, because, you know, the general population kind of want to see things that are scientifically proven. Oh, okay, yeah, this is like aligned with psychology, for example, and people can like feel like there's a bit more validity to doing something like that without it being too woo-woo.
Which is, you know, in my opinion, very ironic, because for me, I always tended to kind of rely on in my heart feeling when something just resonates, right? And I find nowadays in the modern world, we've sort of shifted away from that trust in that, you know, inner voice of the heart so much that we have to rely on these external tools to validate things, external, you know, people, structures of knowledge. And when it comes to burnout is actually a disconnect from self. It's a kind of, you know, numbness that you go into after a series of events happen in your life, and you sort of dissociate, after you harden your heart in many ways, after you disconnect from your natural intuition, after, you know, you've adopted all these habits across your lifetime that eventually lead to living this inauthentic life and disconnecting from your needs, from your values. And so it's so funny, right? When we look at how many people are burnt out nowadays, and I can't help but correlate it with the fact that we have outsourced these ways of trusting so much outside of ourselves, that, you know, we're suffering from this disconnect from the true selves. So what you said about meditation and what it did for you in terms of discovering a more authentic self, the real you, that's so beautiful, because I genuinely hope that more people can discover that for themselves. And the process of recovery is precisely that. Getting back to your whole self, the real self, letting go of these masks, you know, like the fake faces that we put on to fit in the life and world, getting rid of needing someone else to validate what feels right, or tell you what to do or how to live your life. And we need a lot more of that, because I feel like we've all been outsourcing important things for way too long.
Yeah. So many good points that you hit on there. Yeah, especially like not like to be led by your inner knowing in your heart, what resonates. Like, I think that's something that's definitely needing to be honed in on by many people, because yeah, there has been a trend in the past where people want to have like concrete evidence of something written in the literature, but you know, and that's where kind of the biohacking can be interesting, because biohacking is at the forefront of that, where sometimes they're using anecdotal evidence and then doing testing on it themselves. Because if you did wait for, say, like things in the longevity space to be confirmed as safe with like meta studies, etc., that's going to be 20 years down the track. And if you're 40 now, when you're 60 trying to implement those things, it may be a case of catch up. On the other hand, if you do engage in some things that don't have the proven safety record, you are also kind of rolling the dice where it may or may not add to your longevity. You could potentially enhance it, or you may actually, you know, run into some issues where you have to navigate that. But I guess if you can, you know, go with things like, say, resveratrol or something like that, mind you, that's probably got pretty good scientific studies at this point. But yeah, I guess there's different risk profiles within the biohacking space, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, just like with anything. And, you know, who was it? The father of medicine that said it's the dose that makes the poison or the medicine.
Yeah.
So I absolutely discovered that there is such a principle when it comes to any kind of intervention and stress in general. It's not all good or all bad, but good things can become bad for you in large amounts or
Yeah.
insufficient amounts. And
Just
even
like
when
water or...
yeah, precisely, right? Or minerals and things like that. Okay, maybe you're low on copper or something, but if you're getting too much of that, suddenly, you know, you're depleting other things.
Exactly.
Everything in balance, everything in moderation. So like for me, for example, when I look at some of the really out there biohacks, I always try to apply this principle first to kind of see if I can check stuff against my inner system of what I know and the principles that make sense. So like, how balanced is this solution? Is this kind of like pushing things a little bit outside of the scope of things? And what's funny in the biohacking space right now is we have some of the cutting edge science, which, you know, the general public is not aware of yet, but it's actually not necessarily new stuff. It's just scientific validation of ancient stuff that always worked. So I think you'll really relate to that because you're in a space where you understand the flow of energy, chi, and all that stuff. This is not new stuff, but now scientists are starting to find evidence of how this works and what it does, right? So like we have findings from quantum biology about the way sun is powering basically our internal clock, all the biochemical processes in the body. Well, guess what? For thousands of years, our ancestors used to know about that, understand it, and they used to use it in medicine. So like in Chinese traditional medicine, we know there is a clock for different organs, for when you should be sleeping versus doing things, right? All of that.
Yeah,
And now
100%.
we're starting to find more evidence of that, right? And biohackers are kind of at the forefront of, I guess, bringing awareness of that, but also popularizing it. Because the academia, the institutions, are gonna take a while to catch up with this. You know, it's like between 20 to, I don't know, 300 years before an idea catches on, right? Like they only figured out how to treat scurvy. Well, they figured it out, but it only became established and popularized within like a 500-year span. So the question is, like you said, do we want to wait till we're old, or do we want to try some stuff that makes sense, like getting more sunlight and more antioxidants and all that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a key point within biohacking, because some people, you know, and even in like a, you know, kind of benign biohacking way, like say in the fitness space, taking supplements, and people just like try and outwork you know, the basics of diet, sleep, nutrition, recovery, and try and take supplements. But in every case, you're going to be better off focusing on those kind of key elements of sunlight, nutrition, sleep, exercise or movement, recovery, and get those dialed in, and then add the biohacks on top of that. Because I guess to me, it's key when you can try and live, you know, in alignment with the elements, etc. Although our current lifestyle is often taking us away from optimal living with electromagnetic fields and work schedules that have us out of the sunlight and not moving as much. And what is seeming to happen as well is the environmental impact. You can be doing all of those key things that would be contributing to optimal health, but for some of us, through either genetics or environmental factors, may have something else going on that's actually not allowing us to be our optimal self, which is where biohacking comes in. Once you've done those basics, go, okay, let's get some testing done here. Let's look at hormones, nutrients, bloods, etc., different biomarkers, and let's see if there's anything that can be improved upon here. And even beyond that, I guess you can do a little bit of testing with different things and get your subjective feel to what feels better. But again, that comes back to really having a high sense of self-awareness in your own body and what feels right.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, people sometimes think of biohacking. I don't know, we're talking about biohacking a lot, but that's cool. You know, I guess this is where the conversation went. Yeah, biohacking to me is not just supplements, it's not just tracking, but ultimately being your own scientist, right? So any intervention that you try, you see how your body subjectively responds to. So it doesn't have to be anything super nerdy or really out there, but it's even simple stuff like you've done a couple of push-ups and you're seeing how your blood pressure changes or things like that. And I think it's really important nowadays for people to start taking more ownership of their own health, because our healthcare system is no longer able to cope with you know, just like from the economic standpoint and just like the volume of issues, especially in terms of mental health. It's overwhelmed. So people need new solutions. So they need to start kind of taking onus of tracking their own health and becoming their own scientist. That's where I think this biohacking approach is really powerful. So this is something that I'm trying to share with people and teach people how to do, so they don't have to rely on some outsourced knowledge as much, especially because, right? Like, yeah, probably the situation is similar where you're at, right? In terms of the healthcare system.
100%. Yeah, it's very much a reactive system, and it's interesting because healthcare is more like disease care, in all honesty, because when I've gone to the doctor with my own personal health concerns and I could feel that my health was declining, on the blood test, nothing was showing up out of range. And really, it was kind of a case of, let's wait until it gets bad enough that something's reflected in the biomarkers, and then we can act on it, perhaps through a medication or some intervention. What my sentiment was, I want to optimize my health now so I don't have to get to this point where it's harder to recover. I want to catch it now as I've recognized the decline and stop myself getting to that level of suffering. So that really caused me to take my health into my own hands. And I did eventually end up getting to quite a point where clinically, like, I was going through chronic fatigue symptoms, but despite all a matter of blood tests, I was still not finding any smoking gun. And yeah, that caused me to really hone in on all the key things of meditation, to not overuse the mind, to limit my amount of energy output, to focus on diet, nutrition, optimize sleep, all gamut of things. And in the end, it was probably a combination of mercury toxicity from amalgam fillings and sleep apnea that was causing some health concerns there. But it kind of worked out to my favor because those two things weren't found out until probably like 8 years of declining health. And as a consequence, I tried every other thing before them. And so it's really given me like, nothing motivates you like something strong in your own experience to do research. Like if you're like, wow, I can feel my blood sugars high, I'm going to go deep into the rabbit hole of like, what are all the nuances of affecting blood sugar? And I guess because I've had so many years of, you know, I could feel my health lowering, I've looked at many aspects of health. So I'm kind of grateful for the journey for that.
Yeah, I feel you. That's, you know, that's what I got to share with people too, the journey, right? The things we've discovered in the process. Because for me, likewise, I was deeply motivated to resolve my issue. And so I found that I had to do a lot of research. And ultimately, as a researcher, of course, I looked at the body of knowledge that's there, and I realized that our understanding of burnout is outdated, because a lot of the research is from the time period when burnout was studied as a workplace phenomenon. So, you know, it's very much thought of as a thing that happens at work because of work, which is just not true, because people have always burnt out. They have always depleted their energy in various ways. The best example is parental burnout. And there are people in every walk of life that burn out.
I do have, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I do have, a bit of a theory on burnout. And I guess it comes back to, you know, we're all familiar with like, you know, filling your own cup and that kind of metaphor that I guess is about doing activities that are soul nourishing. And it seems like when the amount of effort you're outputting starts to go into like your inner energy reserves, and then they go from, you know, like let's say you're in a path that's aligned with who you want to be, your values, you're getting a sense of fulfillment from the thing you're doing that's meaningful and feeling like purpose. And that generally like fills your cup. So that can allow you to continue putting a lot of energy out to do that because you're getting some back. But let's say you're doing something that's not really aligned with you and you're just working like maybe a 9-to-5 job that you're really not inspired by, and you're putting a lot of effort into that. That effort is what starts to really drain your energy, and that can go down to differing layers. And it seems like once your cup gets to like the critical level, like a phone battery that's on red, that's when we first start to experience the symptoms of burnout. And the further we let that go down, the more the pronounced the burnout symptoms will be. And then it really requires the focus on oneself and what one needs to fill their cup again.
And, you know, as you pointed out, we usually don't notice how that cup fills up. And so what happens is we hyper-focus on a specific cup, which may be work, which is actually a symptom of trying to avoid dealing with other things in life. So there's a bunch of these cups in our life. And I like to think of burnout as a habit. Rather than a condition. You have a series of habits you build up over your lifetime that lead to burnout. So it may look like it's your job that sucks, but at the end of the day, you know, I really like Viktor Frankl's story, because he talked about finding meaning even in such harsh conditions as a concentration camp, and just doing labor and being able to find meaning in something really small in this harsh environment, in this difficult environment, make it your purpose. You can find purpose in anything. I know that in the past when I've worked, you know, labor jobs, for example, something that's really physical, really simple and repetitive, I would certainly use this trick to find meaning and purpose in what I was doing. So at the end of the day, you know, you can make any work meaningful, but how you feel about it changes depending on how you choose to feel about it. So you can absolutely burn out at a, you know, at a boring job, or you can burn out at a great job. In my experience, I burnt out at my favorite job. So, you know, there was no shortage of motivation and purpose there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, interesting.
Right. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that, because some get bored, others don't. there's a lot of other things that are going on as well, like avoiding dealing with stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, sometimes if you are only trying to do the things you want to do, then eventually you can start to get to the point where you don't want to do anything. And yeah, I've been there. But to your point as well about finding purpose in things that may not be aligned, I did that recently this year. I was working in a job that I was doing it for the money, and money's not like one of my highest motivators. So what I found when I was there was I could see how it was benefiting me from a self-growth aspect in healing some wounded masculine aspects within me, and that additional sense of self-growth gave me a lot of meaning and purpose to that actually helped me stay in it and centered a lot longer. So yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway, to find meaning and purpose in whatever you're doing. And I guess sometimes I think Eckhart Tolle has it in one of his books, like if you do something and you just try and do it to the best quality, the best of your ability, then that becomes your task, your meaning in that moment. So yeah, that's a good point to highlight.
For sure. And like we seek meaning and purpose in things to be able to find the motivation to do the things we want to do. And so likewise, we also need to look at what we're trying to avoid. So another thing that leads to burnout, it's a complex thing. There's a lot that contributes to burnout. Avoiding stuff leads to burnout. So if most of our life we've been avoiding our purpose, that will also burn you out. So what do I mean by that? Let's say in the past, perhaps I've worked for other people, but let's say my purpose has been to kind of help other people by becoming an entrepreneur and having my own company. If in the past I never had the energy to do it, and I was scared of taking on a bigger challenge and such a massive responsibility, then avoiding that can also create a lot of hardship in a person's life, because subconsciously they know that, there's a path for them out there. Something is telling them that this may be the thing for them to do, but their thinking mind is going, oof, this is too difficult, not gonna take this on. So you're not living up to your potential. Because talking to a lot of people, I truly believe that everyone knows deep down inside that they have a certain amount of potential. Sometimes we don't know what that looks like, but we all know it. So if you don't live up to your potential, that will burn you out when you're avoiding doing the things you were meant to do in this life. And you're looking for, let's say, easier ways or more convenient ways. And same goes for dealing with various psychological things, right? Like avoiding dealing with conflict. If you're meant to learn to communicate in an open manner with people, to heal your relationships, and you're just running away from that, never learning how to do it, that's also going to burn you out, because you are spending so much energy trying to hold on to this, fear of getting into direct sort of working out of things. So that charge in your system is just going to drain energy and lead to burnout as well. So that's another thing.
That makes sense. So that's kind of what you're talking about with burnout not being a condition, but rather being the habit of avoiding conflict, and then the energy that these habits consume is what can lead to that. And it's like a series of many different habits that are all very energy consuming.
Precisely.
That lead to it.
Yeah, and some of them are really obvious, like always going to bed at different times, staying up late, right? Things like that, liking to sit down all the time, or watching TV while eating, which messes with your digestion because now your nervous system is tuned into the stimuli on the screen and you're not mindful of what you're doing. So yeah, so many different habits that we acquire for how we see the world. Another big one is a habit of seeing yourself as a passive receiver of events in life, what they sometimes call a victim mindset. And
Mm.
we all have it to a certain extent. And it took me years to work through it. And, you know, it's an ongoing process. But the more you live up to your potential and your purpose, the less you feel like things are happening to you, and the more you start feeling like they're happening for you, you're
Mm.
starting to feel more agency in life, and you're starting to kind of hear life more and realizing that none of this is just accidental. All of these things are happening to help me in some way. But of course, depending on my mind state, where I'm at, I might get upset and think that people are being really crappy to me, or life is super unfair. So healing is a process of becoming more whole and more confident in the fact that life has your back, and things that are happening, in fact, could be beneficial if you choose to notice that, if you have the courage to notice that.
Love everything you just said then. Because yeah, I definitely agree with it totally. It's definitely been my experience that it seems to be a rite of passage, you know, as we go through a lot of dense experience in the beginning of life, and we can see life happening to us, that we're that passive victim that is being taken from experience to experience. And then as you recognize that that's not how you want your life to be, and I guess it starts with claiming ownership for you are responsible through your choices for where you are, that you can then, and you know, obviously like early on, some things are out of your control and then that requires acceptance. But typically from adulthood onwards, you have the ability to choose the life or how you want life to look for you. And then, yeah, as you start to follow what your heart wants, it often requires you to break free from a lot of societal or parental structures and trajectory to then choose what you really want. And as you get more on that path towards what your heart's calling, that's when it seems to attract those experiences like you spoke of that are happening for you. And then there even seems to be a point where you can be going with the flow and it can be beneficial, getting experiences coming to you that are benefiting you. But then there's also a point where it's worthwhile using your own agency to create the life you want to, and not just go with the flow.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting balance, eh? So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I've definitely gone with the flow for a lot of things, and that's taken me to many deep experiences that have been profound and beneficial. But then at some point, I found that cycles were repeating. So I was like, okay, going with the flow and following the heart takes you to a certain point, but now I need to use some effort and actually start to break through to the next level to start to create the life that I want. So I'm still doing that at the moment, I must admit. But yeah, it's been basically through escaping. I'm halfway between like paid work and purpose work, where I've optimized my life to have a job that I can be very high paying and I can go into whenever I want. And then I'll earn some money from that. And then I'll devote 3 to 6 months to do the purpose work. And I've done that 3 times in the last 3 years since I set that intention. And each time I get a little bit closer to breaking through and creating the life I want. And it seems like the key to me is changing who I am. So creating, you know, behaving the way that I would need to be the self and wealth generating version of myself. So a nice morning routine, not using social media, not laying in bed, not sleeping in, still giving myself, you know, the sleep that I need, which starts the night before with a healthy evening routine, meditation, winding the body down, clearing the nervous system, clearing the mind, entering stillness, maybe a little bit of biohacking with zinc and magnesium if the body needs it, and then using blackout curtains and going into a deep sleep, and then using the day productively, getting some exercise in through weights and sauna, maybe a bit of ice bath, then going into meditation, building some momentum for the day, building that into dollar productive activities with my business, then perhaps a podcast, a bit of creative purpose things in the evening, social activities, and yeah, just having a bit of a balanced day. And so the more that I can act in that way, the more that life I want to create is happening. And I guess that's the process of it for me.
That's pretty cool. Love your routine. That's all really good, awesome stuff. You know what's interesting though? The flow has a structure to it too, right? So the more I learn about the cycles and rhythms that we have from like micro to macro, because our cells have a cycle, right? Organs, like internal clock for everything.
Circadian rhythm, and then
and all of that in nature too, right? We have a day, a month, a year. There is solar cycles, lunar cycles, all of that good stuff. The more I realize there is a structure to these, right? So it's dependable, it's constant, and it cycles through. It keeps going. You know, nothing has changed for thousands of years. And so I think the flow, I'm almost getting a new understanding of flow here, which is its structure, right? It's dependable structure, but not in the way that we kind of used to understand it, but in a way where you go through ebbs and flows, but in a consistent, structured way. So a lot of people that burn out, they have this mindset which contributes to them burning out. Again, a habit of living in a kind of chaotic state where you just sort of attend to whatever comes into your line of vision, pops into your head, go for that, sort of this urgency culture and just going with what you're asked immediately. And so that's burning people out because they are having this chaotic state of just do this, do that, and it doesn't help in work or business either. And even though that feels like going with the flow, I realized it's not, because the flow is the state of, yeah, there is change, but it's structured, right? We go through these patterns. So what I help people do is to get into a mindset where they stop feeling like structure is something annoying or boring or lame or constricting, and start thinking about it as something that's going to liberate their energy, time, and creativity. And so when we talk about flow, I think you're helping me realize that my understanding of flow changed a lot too. And it's kind of looking for that middle point of just listening to yourself, going with it, but having the structure and understanding that you are not going to be 100% every hour of the day, every day of the week. And that's okay, because neither is anything else in our alive, natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you just said there about flow having a structure, and also the point that you were saying about that culture of just doing what comes up in our sphere. And I think perhaps a really micro example, and maybe even a metric of way to tell where someone's at with that, is if you got them to go into their phone and send a message on a social media app, how much do they get caught up in the scroll and other notifications? And, I guess the more ability, the better someone is able to go in and execute on their intention versus someone that goes in to do one thing and then gets caught up in a 5, 10, 15-minute use of that technology, is probably a reflection of how much they have that tendency to do whatever comes in their sphere.
That's a cool one.
It seems like early on, let's say when we're leaving our comfort zone, it's really beneficial to say yes to every opportunity. And maybe you found that when even starting on the coaching, helping others space, but then at some point you can't say yes to everything and you have to start to say no. And maybe that's like, another thing that can definitely contribute to burnout if you aren't being focused on what you need or what you want to do to move you towards where you want to be.
Yeah, 100%. Focus is energy directed at something specific. And our biggest problem in society today is being able to collect our energy and direct it at something. Everyone's attention is just bouncing back and forth. It's really difficult for people to focus. I can see this because things have changed over the years. I've noticed how people's mind and attention has started to wander a lot more. So when I have conversations with people, I guess through the benefit of consistent meditation practice, I'm able to control my attention where I'm noticing these things in other people, right? Because I have that awareness. And so I see that people are just less present. They're bouncing more between things. They're not able to focus on like the thing you're saying. So their attention is going back and forth between things. And of course, technology has contributed to that a lot. So
Definitely so.
yeah, what you said about the phone is that's a really good test. If you're gonna get on your phone, yeah, just see to which extent you're in control of that energy and how it's being directed. That's self-regulation, super important for success in anything.
100%. Yeah, I've actually set myself kind of guidelines, rules before for productivity. And what I've done is limited my technology use to about half an hour at say 10:30 and then at 2:30. So I have my phone on do not disturb and maybe on a focus mode that limits the apps just to stop any neural pathway habits to, wanting to go in there. And then I'll allow myself half an hour to respond to messages. But each time I go in, I'll go in with a mantra: get in, get out. Like whenever I use the technology, it's with a purpose. Okay, I'm checking a message, I'm responding to it, and now I'm not using it. And that definitely seemed to be, the more I was in a disciplined state of mind, the more I was able to do that. And it was interesting to see when I would have, say, a cold shower, that would increase my ability to do that. And I realized that whenever you do an activity that creates a single pointed focusedness of the mind, for example, a cold shower that causes you to focus on your breath, a single point, that seems to bring all that scattered energy and focus out and into a directed laser beam like focus that can really allow you to wield your attention and focus in a more direct manner. So that was quite interesting to see.
That's really cool. Very cool observation. Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a bit of an energy crisis, and I'm not talking about Europeans who right now are suffering, the cold winter. No, energy crisis, actually a pervasive energy crisis when it comes to humans no longer being in control of their energy, focus, and attention, and not being able to direct it, which really sucks because we need the next generation of people that are going to be doing good things in the world. And one of the things I'm trying to do with Burnout Broccoli Club is actually helping people start develop this awareness of themselves, their attention, how to regain control over it, because I think that's going to be a major future asset in our world. And I would like to see more people be able to control their attention so they can put it to good use, whether it's entrepreneurship or supporting their community. I think people need to start taking responsibility and ownership, not just for their health, but everything else in the world, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Enough is enough. And how are we going to do that if we're constantly distracted, if we can't execute on the things we dream of, right? You can have a vision board, but hello, you need to put energy behind executing on that.
Yeah, exactly. Execution is something that's really neglected quite often in many spaces, and it's really key because anyone can have an idea and a vision, but to actually make it a reality requires action and execution. So I think that's such a really pivotal thing that you touched on, being able to help people bring their energy back in and focus it. Because you're right, that's definitely something that's almost feeling like it's by design as years go on to take it away from us. And it does have a benefit though, because the more opportunities for distraction that we have, the more empowering it is when you overcome them, because you know that it's not easy. So when you do have that agency over yourself, it creates a deeper sense of empowerment than you would have otherwise got, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. That's our only option, realistically, right? Because we've created this world of overstimulation, information overload, abundance, where we have instant gratification, instant everything. I mean, it's still a little bit shocking to me that you can order anything on Amazon and get it the next day. Like, we live in a pretty cool, crazy world, but guess what? We've created an environment which is also, on the other hand, destroying our motivation, attention, happiness, because with instant gratification comes that sort of feeling of blah and nothing being good enough. So we have no choice but to learn to set boundaries with that, because if we don't, then I just don't think we're gonna survive as a species.
No, definitely. There's a really good thought that just created, that it's interesting to see how over the hundreds of years, the lag between like what we want and getting it is started to shorten. And I guess from an energetic movement point of view, you could almost say that the vibration is speeding up in a sense, and like you said, that creates a lot of opportunity, almost infinite possibilities, but that can be a double-edged sword, that we could start a business today and be making money this afternoon, but we can also be entertained, in that same breath and go into distraction. So I like to look at things, not to get too dualistic, but, what's easy and what's right. And it does seem like in each moment we have a bit of a binary choice that's moving towards who we want to be and towards, I guess, what's easy to do, the path of least resistance, what maybe our lower self might be, our impulsive self might drive us to do. In a moment, we could have the burger, the candy, or we could eat, a healthy veggie salad meal. And usually the path that's right requires inner knowing of oneself, discipline, all of, the things that cultivate a well-rounded self, and then falling into that path of, and I guess what it is short-term gratification versus long-term contentment, going into debt now to have the thing right now, working to save it up, and having a sense of contentment that you earn that thing without going through that short-term gratification process. So yeah, it's interesting. I guess that's being more pronounced now than ever.
I think so. And I keep looking at the yin yang symbol behind you in the background, and it just keeps coming up for me in our conversation, right? The sort of two sides. You put it so well. If you don't mind, I'm gonna start using that.
For sure.
What you want and what's right. Like, this is such an amazing way to put it. I think effectively that's where it's at. That's the crux of wellness and burnout recovery, and preventing burnout from happening. Getting better at choosing what's right versus what you want. And of course, we can't be machines that are super, we just like choose the right thing all the time.
No, that's right. Like, I actually made a little infographic. I called it the choice matrix. So it's basically like you've got a choice in a moment here, what's easy, what's right, but then that leads to another one and another one. So you end up having like this matrix of choices. And I guess depending on how ingrained the pattern was in the past is how many sequential choices you could make in a row. Let's pretend you're someone that eats fast food every meal, and you're trying to optimize your health, and what you want to do is eat, whole foods that you've made for yourself for every meal. if you've never done that before, the likelihood of doing 5 choices in a row is pretty low. You're more likely to do 1, back to there, 1, back to there, and like you're probably going to do 20% of choices. And I guess it's about being realistic at that point. But let's pretend you have been having fast food once every 10 meals. Your ability to make the sequential choices of eating whole foods could quite likely be 5 out of 5 at that point. And the interesting thing is, let's say you make 5 out of 5 choices, you could get there in 4 weeks. Let's say you make only 3 out of 5 choices, and so you go off and now your timeline's out here. You'll still get to where you want to be, except this was 4 weeks and now this is 6 weeks. So you can still get to where you want to be. It's just more choices away from your ideal, extend the time horizon to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, we pay for things we want to obtain with either time or, something else. And of course, we've built this habit, so, it's up to us to undo it now. And I love how you've made it really visual and easy for people to understand, kind of like that equation of depending how bad the habit is, it might take more choices and a longer time horizon to work it out. But optimization can happen at each and any level, which is absolutely true. So the cool thing is, when we go through the healing process, we kind of go from just having terrible habits in all different areas of our life. So there can be made these immediate optimizations that are super obvious, like, let's say, making sure you have breakfast in the morning, right? That's really straightforward, but a lot of people don't do it, and they totally screw up their hormones and that, daily energy cycle because of it. And then as you become better at this stuff, your optimizations become different. They're like more fine-tuned, right? So maybe like you're working on diaphragmatic breathing and you're really getting into noticing, developing an awareness of tension in different internal core muscles and things like that. So yeah, at any stage of the process, you can introduce more optimizations to basically become a more energized person. And I was curious, so you started talking about a little bit about this process and kind of like how long it's gonna take. So a lot of people out there are trapped in this mode of thinking, which leads to burnout, which is, I gotta go fast to keep up with others. So I'd be curious to explore that together. And in your life experience, have you discovered how going slower can actually make you more efficient?
Going slower just compared to others, or like just finding, I guess, I'll answer it my own way first. So I guess the way that I've been looking at this lately is what success requires, what I can do sustainably, and what's like the minimum I can do, and trying to, let's say it was to do something really tangible like lose weight. I need to drop my calories by this, and I need to do this amount of energy output exercise, but maybe my health's not at the point where I can do that. And so I'm going to just focus on what I can do and what's sustainable for me and what makes me feel good. And maybe it's going to take a bit lower, but the consistency because for me, that's going to create a consistent approach versus if I tried to do a crash diet right now, I might lose a few kilos this week, but then I'm not going to be able to sustain it. So after 3 weeks, I've crashed, I can't continue, I've burnt out, and now I'm going to go back to what's comfortable, and I might put on those that weight again. And if I keep going, crash back, and I'm probably just going to stay where I originally started, or even higher, because of hormones, etc., that I would have suppressed during it. Versus if I go that consistent approach, it might not be as aggressive in the beginning, but because I'm making consistent progress, then that's actually going to get me in 6 months' time much closer to where I want to be than if I just tried to do it aggressively and fell off and kept trying.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful because you touched on consistency. That's the thing. It's like this absolute magic ingredient that most of us have not experienced in life. It's so hard won, so hard to obtain. So like I know for myself and a lot of people out there, because we have not experienced consistency, we try to just go for that, beeline for immediate result, biggest impact. And that's where what you described starts happening, right? You crash and then you have to go all the way back up and then you crash again. Because consistency is really difficult. It requires a lot of patience and it feels like progress is small and it's going to take a while. And I think this is where this notion of slowing down comes from. Basically, you have to do things at your pace, but keep doing them consistently. So it feels super slow, but in fact, it's building up bigger momentum and bigger compounding interest and payoff over time. And so when you started talking about how you structured your life in terms of, okay, you realized it's going to take you a certain amount of time to get to where you want to get. So you now have a source of income where, you have these cycles. I'm working for this much, then I can invest in my passion project for this amount of time. And you kind of have this cycle, right? You're building stuff up. Okay, yeah, it didn't all happen. You didn't go hard for 1 month and just like, that's it.
yeah,
No, you're building up to things. I think that's wonderful. That's one of the ways I think we can repair our own health and just a lot of things in life if we become more patient with ourselves and others.
I must admit though, yeah, even with the way I've created my life, it's still a little bit of that. I am a very all or nothing person, and consistency, I've realized, is what success requires. So I've been consistent in the sense of being all or nothing, but I have recognized it's definitely coming to a point where I think, because I've been doing like FIFO work. I'm not sure if you have that there in Europe, like a mining equivalent, like where people work remotely for blocks of time. And then it's usually like quite high paying and also high hours, like 80 hours a week or so. And let's say you do that for, like you could do that for probably 3 months. And then if I were to live in Thailand, I could have an easy 6 to 9 months of living there for that. So like from a trading time perspective, 3 months and then 9 months to work on the passion project seemed to make sense to me, but now I'm getting to a point where I also recognize it may be better to focus on, say, doing a job that's 20 hours a week that allows me to put 20 hours into the purpose work, be consistent, and then let that grow from there. Because what tends to happen with the way I've done it is, so I'll work flat out and there's no progress on business for several months, and then it takes a bit of time after to get back to a state of being after having been completely in doing, and then it will take a bit just to get off. And just as I'm like starting to get to that key point where consistency would turn into compounding results, I need to go back to work. And so each time I've done it, I've got a little bit higher. But yeah, I do recognize that consistency, what seems to provide the most results, not just trying to sprint harder.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a difficult thing to obtain, but it's absolutely key. And I think in the past, people used to value that trait more, right? When I think about the previous generations, people were more about that. But everything is very different now, much more fast-paced. People change jobs all the time. People expect quick results. Technology has contributed to that a lot because we can create kind of this instant feedback loop of things. So it feels like things can happen more quickly, including creating a product or even starting a business. So I want to put it out there for any people who are becoming entrepreneurs or just getting into doing something. because it may seem like things can happen really quickly, because that's the dream that's being sold online. But in fact, everything takes time to build up, quite a bit of time, probably a lot more time than you think or expect. So no need to get
Absolutely.
disappointed. Just gotta keep going.
And I guess what you touched on there really just ties back into that short-term gratification versus long-term contentment. And long-term contentment definitely comes from consistency in things. So what would you say would be, if someone was suffering burnout right now, what would you advise them? What would you suggest they could do to improve their state?
I would say depending on the stage of burnout you're in. So let's say usually when people become aware of their burnout, it's in that severe stage of they're in the process of crashing already. It takes a few years to get to that point, but people usually don't notice something is happening. So when you're in the process of going through this crash already, that's kind of when you notice. And at that point, you need sort of really immediate, almost drastic interventions. So you want to do things like reduce your workload, figure out some kind of arrangement for either working less or working part-time, or maybe taking a sabbatical or some time off. And here's an important thing. A lot of people will keep putting off that decision because they just gonna see how much longer I can go. There is that tendency to keep pushing yourself. Well, don't wait. Trust me, it's only gonna get worse. So, put the brakes on it immediately. Once you do that, you need to start changing things in your life. So I like to do a quick assessment with people to understand which habits are really prominent in terms of draining their energy. So one of the common ones would be people pleasing, a habit of putting your needs last, avoiding voicing your concerns, not expressing discontent with something, and just doing stuff when people ask you to do stuff regardless of how you feel about it, because you're worried about disappointing others. So right there, that's the first thing that's common for a lot of burnoutees, and you want to put some brakes on that and learn how to say no to things, because the world won't end, nothing will catch on fire if you just tell your friends that, you know what, I don't have the energy to hang out this weekend, maybe we can postpone. Or tell your boss that, you know, I am really overloaded, I don't feel like I'll be able to take on this other thing. And don't let the fear in the back of your head convince you otherwise, because it's basically it's now between your survival, right, and this perceived danger of displeasing others.
What's interesting there is if you don't say no at those points, what would have been a weekend or a day of work, a week of work missed, you keep going. Later on, it's not having the energy at all for sustaining that friendship. It's not being able to work. So that little no now becomes a big problem later, where you would have missed a small amount and then you miss a massive amount. And yeah, that's a hard way to come to the realization that I should have prioritized my needs early on, because those needs continue to grow, and yeah, that can be quite overwhelming.
Totally. And our mind, when it's all revved up from stress, tricks us into perceiving things as more urgent or more important than they truly are. So it's really important to learn to slow down. When people are in that acute stage of burnout, they're so revved up that they're used to go, 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 switch between things. They can't calm down. They're often really wired in the evening. Sometimes people will wake up with morning anxiety. And there is that sort of latent, slow burning anxiety all throughout the day. And it can manifest in ways that people are not used to noticing. You just feel like things are urgent. You're in a rush. It feels like you're overwhelmed. There's too much going on. You're moody. All that stuff is associated with anxiety. And anxiety is basically you're perceiving time as going faster and you're perceiving things as being too much. So you need to slow down, because the thing that anxiety is telling you is there is stuff that just needs to come out. You need to process, you need to slow down. But people misinterpret their anxiety as, I need to go do more, I need to rush, I need to catch up, I need to be in more places, I need to finish more things, I need to get to the end of whatever. And that's precisely the opposite of what you should be doing. So consciously slowing down is really important, because we tend to get into this cycle of overstimulation, which winds us up, and then we're just feeling unable to shut down. So even during sleep, what I hear from a lot of people, they feel like they're not really sleeping, they're thinking at night. So that's
where meditation would be so key, because I find in my experience, when I meditate prior to bed and you get into that state, there's often a lot of things that seem to be trapped in the nervous system that then come up as thoughts. And you might have had, like, sometimes it's not even something that's been an experience, but it's a feeling. And I'll have like a bit of a scenario play out where someone's like being like aggressive to me, and at some point I've taken on that energy and then it's coming up as a thought. And it seems as though when I meditate and feel into my body, it releases those impacts or imprints on the nervous system that were creating tension, and then it contributes to a better sleep. So I wonder how much, that could be an aspect of it too.
100%. It's all about letting yourself process stuff that's happening. And unfortunately, because we've created such a fast-paced lifestyle for ourselves, with this culture of urgency and immediacy, and informational overload, like we consume so much more information on a daily basis now, like a lifetime of information that people used to consume a century ago. So just think about it. Our brain has not been designed to deal with so much. So naturally, you're not going to be able to come down and sleep, because we physiologically have the need to be able to process all that, and our nervous system will store that. And eventually we think, oh my gosh, why am I feeling so terrible and down and things are hurting? There's all that stuff that we've been just jumping from one day to the next without processing. It just needs to go through the cycle. It just needs to come out. We need to put it in its appropriate boxes and move on.
Absolutely.
But we don't have the time for that, unfortunately.
Do you know what is a really good hack that I've found is yoga nidra, also called DSNR, deep sleep non-restorative. Sorry, let me butcher it a few times there. Deep non-sleep restoration, something like that, from Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Yes.
So like he's popularized that, but it's also been an existing practice in yogic communities called yoga nidra. But I think he did that for the benefit of the scientific community that, like we spoke about earlier on, sometimes don't want to go with something that's not scientific. So basically I found when my nervous system was tense, or at any point really, you could do this 15-minute guided meditation where you'd lay down. I'd have my arms overhead, which would serve the benefit of, after 15 minutes, they'd go numb, and it would force me to wake up, causing it to be a perfect 15-minute power nap. But every time I would do it, I would go into such a deep state of relaxation, kind of like if you've ever had a massage and you're on the massage table and you really go deep, that kind of level. And I'd sometimes have like involuntary jerks of like muscles, which were trapped energy kind of releasing for me. And it would give me what felt like the equivalent of a 3-hour nap in 15 minutes. So for the time conscious individual, that's quite a good way to go. And I'll try and put a link in the description to wherever I put this podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great hack. Love it. Great biohack. I hope the guys who are listening are paying attention.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, beautiful. Well, just being mindful of time, it's gone incredibly quickly. very much enjoyed having this conversation. That was well due. So maybe just quickly before we leave, you could just let me and share with the audience what you're offering at the moment, like how you're helping people.
Sure. So I work with professionals, people who usually are used to overworking themselves, and they have certain career goals, to help them quit burnout for good. And the reason I say that is because according to research, people who burn out once tend to burn out repeatedly. So I lovingly call them serial burnoutees. So there's a cycle, right, that people get into, because once you get to the point of burnout, you have all these habits that lead you to stay trapped in the cycle of stress response. So your nervous system needs a reset, and naturally, you're not going to be able to reset it unless you change these habits and patterns and actually implement things in your life that on a day-to-day basis will help you release that stress. So you're going to be more energy efficient. So what I mean by quitting burnout is basically helping people learn the habits of never burning out again, using their energy more efficiently, changing how they think about stuff, their daily routines and all that. And some of these things are pretty boring, so a lot of people will overlook them, like, the stuff we talked about, having breakfast, let's say, to optimize your hormonal levels, or not having coffee first thing in the morning, which will jack up your adrenaline. So these are really small things that people probably don't think make a big impact, but altogether they do. So I work with people on things like microbiome, habits like people pleasing, working on their circadian rhythm, improving their posture, which plays a huge role in blood pressure and getting the blood flow to the brain, all that good stuff. Yeah, developing habits that basically help people be more energy efficient and help them eliminate any fears or hangbacks they have from their burnout experience. Because a lot of folks want to do something else. We talked about purpose and feeling like you can do more. But for a lot of people, burnout is going to hold them back from that because they feel like, oh, I just don't want to end up here again. So I also teach them how to expand their capacity. So I have a program where we work on these protocols, and then we also have in-depth transformative sessions. And it's not therapy. It's completely different from therapy because we don't get into your childhood. We don't, get into trauma and all that. We don't have to blame the mom or the dad. Like, there are certain things that we know they happen because of that. And all we need to do is start building new habits to rewire the brain and move on without having to disturb the person or having to dig through their past and do all that. Because there are a lot of individuals out there that find themselves going to therapy for many years, but not really moving forward. So there is a balance between understanding what happened in your life and what impacted you, and actually doing things, which is getting out of your head, changing your physiology, changing what you do throughout the day. And that can drive the change in your mind just as much as your mind can drive the change in your surrounding. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, that's such a key point that I think goes overlooked. The biology can often influence the mental cognition and psychology so much that, yeah, definitely gets missed. So that's really key. That all sounds, yeah, so aligned. So many things were coming up for me there that, like through my own values and approaches with yoga and different things. And I was just, seeing that your approach had a lot of holistic nature. It was touching on a lot of key points that would be so beneficial for professionals. So yeah, well done. It's a really, really well constructed offer.
Thank you. Thank you. It was lovely chatting about this, and I appreciate the opportunity to actually speak to someone who's really open-minded and also understands kind of the full gamut of different approaches out there without being closed-minded when it comes to whether it's science or things that are more spiritual. I think we need more of that in the world as well, because that is a sign of high degree of neuroplasticity. And so what I encourage people to develop in the program as well is becoming more open-minded, because that is literally the sign that your brain can change, you can learn, and you're gonna age less than other people.
Very fascinating. I guess for me that comes from being open to the truth, wherever that may come from, whether it's a person that's out on the street, speaking something, or it's religion, or whether it's, something that you feel resonates. So quite interesting to hear the science on that.
Yeah,
and
yeah, totally.
How can people get in touch with you, Anna?
So I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So you can hit me up on any one of those. I love meeting new people, talking to folks. So yeah, get in touch. I'll be able to help you diagnose your burnout, help you better understand your habits. And then if you're interested in getting help, then we can talk more in depth about one-on-one coaching.
Perfect. Beautiful. All right. I'll leave it there, and I'll just catch you after this recording.
Okay. Thank you so much. It was a lovely talk. Thank you.
Likewise.